guys, we're back. We've got him from out over the YMCA. He's that's as big as his head, isn't it? It's bigger than his head. Does he blink? Oh, he doesn't know. Okay. There's always an old saying in the UK about buses. They usually come 3 in a row, but they're all the same bus. What the shit. Anyway, guys. Let's go. Is that? That's Buckingham Palace. Tell you what, let's go this one first. Hokey cokey. Oh, hokey cokey cokey. Let's go rob a car.
I take your car now!
Auto drive.
I'm out driving in my car. It looks like an Audi, doesn't it? Very similar to an Audi. Style of an Audi. I might be wrong, but yeah, 42. I think that was the one in the UK that used to go where I used to live. That in Manchester, that used to be going from town Piccadilly to the airport on it. It's been, like I say, it's been about 8 years since I was in the UK. Is it Mister? Okay, I'm not
Auto
waiting.
drive now disabled.
Fantastic. I've got Myron Fagan in the background, if anyone's asking. I have it low, but I can turn it up if you want to listen. I've got a fascination with the Illuminati. All right then. Rothschild.
Which from the outset was designed to give the synagogue of Satan, so named by Jesus Christ, ultimate world domination, so they could impose a Luciferian ideology upon what would remain of the human race after the final social cataclysm by use of satanic despotism. Weishaupt completed his task May 1st, 1776.
I like how it's all public.
Now you know why May 1 is a great day with all communist nations in this world. That was the day, May 1, 1776, that Weishaupt completed his plan and officially organized the Illuminati to put the plan into execution. That plan required the destruction of all existing governments and religions. That objective was to be reached by dividing the masses of people whom he, Weishaupt, termed voyeurs, or human capital, into opposing camps in ever-increasing numbers on political, social, economic, and other issues. The very conditions we have in our country today. The opposing sides were then to be armed and incidents provided, which would force them to fight and weaken themselves. And
What do you reckon? Let's stay in here. Or even get away with it.
Do your job, little one.
The very conditions in the world today. And at this point, let me stress a prime feature of the Illuminati plan. When and if their blueprint for world control, the protocols of the elders of science.
Some are different
And exposed.
because there's no cameras in there.
All the Jews off the face of the earth in order to divert suspicion from themselves. If you think this is far-fetched, bear in mind that
Oh.
they permitted Hitler,
Effing hell.
who was fined by Trump, Kennedy, the Warbles, and the Rockefellers.
Seriously, that was the easiest. That was the easiest mission I've ever done.
Why did the conspirators choose the word Illuminati for their satanic organization? Weishaupt himself said that the word is derived from Lucifer and means holders of the light. Using the lie that his objective was to bring about a one-world government to enable those with mental ability to govern the world and prevent all wars in the future. In short,
Let's have a look
using
up
the
there.
word peace on earth as his
Can't
bait,
do.
exactly as that same bait, peace, was used by the 1945 conspirators to force the United Nations on us. Weishaupt,
I think that was the easiest job I've ever done.
by the Rothschilds, recruited some 2,000 paid followers. These included the most intelligent men in the fields of arts and letters, education, the sciences, finance, and industry. He then established lodges of the Grand Orient, Masonic lodges, to be their secret headquarters. And
That was so easy, that one.
But in all of this, he was acting
Easy
under
peasy,
orders
lemon
of the House
squeezy.
of Rothschild. The main features of the Weishaupt plan of operation required his Illuminati to do the following things to help them to accomplish their purpose. Number one, use monetary and sex bribery to obtain control of men already in high places in the various levels of all governments and other fields of endeavor. Once influential persons had fallen for the lies, deceits, and temptations of the Illuminati, they were to be held in bondage by application of political and other forms of blackmail, threats of financial ruin, public exposure and physical harm, even death, to themselves and loved members of their family. Do you realize how many present oppositions are Washington are controlled in just that way?
Most of them.
Do you realize how many homosexuals in our state spend all federal agencies?
It's all coming out now about them now being perverts, paedophiles and homosexuals. That's what they're saying. And I've got nothing against homosexuality gays, but if they don't want it back then, no, you're not allowed to come out as who you are. No.
That gives you an idea what a Rhodes Scholarship means. It means indoctrination into accepting the idea that only a one-world government can put an end to recurring wars and strife. That's how the United Nations was sold to the American people. One of the most notable Rhodes Scholars we have in our country is Senator William J. Fulbright, sometimes referred to as half-bright. His entire voting record spells Illuminati. All such scholars were to be first persuaded and then convinced that men of special talent and brains have the right to rule those less gifted on the ground, but the masses don't know what is best for them physically, mentally, and spiritually. In addition to the Rhodes and similar scholarships, today there are 3 special Illuminati schools located in Bordenstown in Scotland, Salem in Germany, and Anagrita in Greece. These 3 are known, but there are others that are kept undercover. Prince Philip, the husband of Britain's Queen Elizabeth, was educated at Bordenstown, at the instigation of Lord Louis Mountbatten, his uncle, a Rothschild relative, who became Britain's admiral of the fleet after World War II ended. Number 3. All influential people trapped into coming under the control of the Illuminati, plus the students who have been specially educated and trained, were to be used as agents and placed behind the scenes of all governments as experts and specialists, so they would advise the top executives to adopt policies which would, in the long run, serve the secret plans of the Illuminati's one-world conspiracy and bring about the destruction of the governments and religions they were elected or appointed to serve. Do you know how many such men operate in our government at this very time? Russell, McNamara, Hubert Humphrey, Albright, Kcin, and go on and on and on. Number 4, perhaps the most vital directive in White House's plan was to obtain absolute control of the press, at that time the only mass communications media to distribute information to the public, so that all news and information could be slandered, so that the masses could be convinced that a one-world government is the only solution to our many and varied problems. Now do you know who owns and controls our mass communications media? Loeb and Company, Goldman Sachs, and other internationalist bankers. All the national radio and TV channels in the nation are owned and controlled by those same internationalist
Check the last known
bankers.
position.
The same is true of every chain of metropolitan newspapers and magazines. Also of the press wire services, such as Associated Press, United Press International, etc. The supposed heads of all those media are nearly the fronts of the international bankers,
Oh
who
shit.
in turn compose the
That lasted long,
hierarchy of
didn't
the
it?
CFR, today's Illuminati in America. Now can you understand why the Pentagon's press agent Sylvester so brazenly proclaimed that the government has the right to lie to the people? What he really meant was that our CFR-controlled government had the power to lie to and be believed by the brainwashed American people. And let's again go back to the first days of the Illuminati. Because Britain and France were the two greatest world powers in the late years of the 18th century, Weishaupt ordered the Illuminati to foment the colonial wars, including our Revolutionary War, to weaken the British Empire and organize the French Revolution to destroy the French Empire. He scheduled the French Revolution to start in 1789. However, in 1784, a true act of God placed the Bavarian government in possession of evidence which proved the existence of the Illuminati. And that evidence could have saved France if they, the French government, hadn't refused to believe it. Here is how that act of God acted. It was in 1874 that Weishaupt issued the orders for the French Revolution. A German writer named Schwack put it into book form. It contained the entire Illuminati story and Weishaupt's plan. A copy of this book was sent to the Illuminists in France, headed by Robespierre, whom Weishaupt had delegated to foment the French Revolution. The courier was struck and killed by lightning as he rode through Raleston on his way from Frankfurt to
Backup
Paris.
units to my location.
The police found the subversive documents on his body and turned him over to proper report. After careful study of the plot, the Bavarian government ordered the police to raid Weishaupt's newly organized lodges of the Grand Order and the homes of his most influential associates. All of additional evidence thus discovered convinced the authorities
Confirm
the
the
documents
suspect's
were
last visual
genuine
contact.
copies of the conspiracy by which the Illuminati planned to use wars and revolutions to bring about the establishment of a one-world government, the powers of which they, headed by the Rothschilds, intended to usurp as soon as it was established. Exactly in line with the United Nations plot of today. In 1785, the Bavarian government outlawed the Illuminati and closed the lodges of the Grand Order. In 1786, they published all the details of the conspiracy. The English title of that publication is The Original Writings of the Order and Sect of the Illuminati. Copies of the entire conspiracy were sent to all the heads of church and state in Europe. But the power of the Illuminati, which was actually the power of the Rothschilds, was so great that this warning was ignored. Nevertheless, Illuminati became a dirty word, and it went underground. At the same time, Weishaupt ordered Illuminists to infiltrate into the lodges of Freemasonry and form their own secret society.
I think I've done this place.
Only Masons who proved themselves internationalists, those whose conduct
There you go.
proved they had defected from God, were initiated into the Illuminati. Thenceforth, the conspirators donned the cloak of philanthropy and humanitarianism to conceal their revolutionary and subversive activity. In order to infiltrate into Masonic lodges in Britain, Weishaupt invited John Robison over to Europe. Robison was a high-degree Mason in the Scottish Rite. He was a professor of natural philosophy at Edinburgh University and secretary of the Royal Society of Edinburgh. Robison did not fall to the lie that the objective of the Illuminati was to create a benevolent dictatorship, but he kept his reactions to himself so well that he was entrusted with a copy of Weishaupt's revised conspiracy for study and safekeeping. Anyway, because the heads of state and church in France were deluded into ignoring the warnings given them, the revolution broke out in 1789 as scheduled by Weishaupt. In order to alert other governments to their danger, in 1798 Robison published a book entitled Proof of a Conspiracy to Destroy All Governments and Religions. But his warnings were ignored, exactly as our American people have been ignoring all
ATL
warnings
unsuccessful.
about the United
Circling
Nations
back.
and the Council on Foreign Relations, the CFR. Now here is something that will stun and very likely outrage many who hear this, that there is documentary proof that our own Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton became students of Weishaupt. Jefferson was one of Weishaupt's strongest defenders when he was outlawed by his government. And it was Jefferson who infiltrated the Illuminati into the then newly organized lodges of the Scottish Rite in New England. Here is the proof. In 1789, John Robison warned all Masonic leaders in America that the Illuminati had infiltrated into their lodges. And on July 19, 1789, David Papin, president of Harvard University, issued the same warning to the graduating class and lectured them on the influence Illuminism was acquiring on American politics and religion. And to top it off, John Quincy Adams, who had organized the New England Masonic Lodges, issued his warning. He wrote 3 letters to Colonel William L. Stone, the top Mason, in which he exposed how Jefferson was using Masonic lodges for subversive, illuministic purposes. Those 3 letters are at this very time in Wittenberg Square Library in Philadelphia. In short, Jefferson, founder of the Democratic Party, was a member of the Illuminati, which at least partly accounts for the condition of the party at this time, and through infiltrations of the Republican Party. we have exactly nothing that loyal Americans do today. That disastrous freak-off at the Congress in Vienna, created by the Tsar of Russia, did not by any means destroy the Illuminati conspiracy. It merely forced them to adopt a new strategy. Realizing that the one-world idea was, for the moment, killed, the Rothschilds decided that to keep the plot alive, they had to do it by heightening their control of the money systems of the European nations. Earlier, by a ruse, the outcome of the Battle of Waterloo had
There's a
been
shooter up here! What?
Rothschild had spread a story that Napoleon had won that battle. That had precipitated a terrific panic on the stock market in England. All stocks had plummeted down to practically zero, and Nathan Rothschild bought all the stocks for virtually a penny of its dollar value. That gave him complete control of the economy of Britain and virtually of all Europe. So immediately after that Congress in Vienna at Boomerang, Rothschild forced Britain to set up a new Bank of England, which he absolutely controlled. Exactly as later, through Jacob Schiff, he engineered our own Federal Reserve Act, which gave the House of Rothschild a secret control of the economy in the United States. But now for a moment, let's dwell on the activities of the Illuminati in the United States. In 1826, one Captain William Morgan decided it was his duty to inform all Masons and the general public what the full truth was regarding the Illuminati, their secret plans and intended objectives. Also reveal the identity of the masterminds of the conspiracy. The Illuminati promptly tried Morgan in absentia and convicted him of treason. They ordered one Richard Howard, an English Illuminist, to carry out their sentence of execution as a traitor. Morgan was warned and he tried to escape to Canada, but Howard caught up with him near the border, near the Niagara Gorge to be exact, where he murdered him. This was verified in the sworn statement made in New York by one Avery Allen to the effect that he heard Howard render his report of the execution to a meeting of Knights Templars in St. John's Hall, New York. He also told how arrangements had been made to ship Howard back to England. That Allen affidavit is on record in New York City archives. Very few Masons and very few of the general public know that general disapproval over that incident of murder caused approximately half of all the Masons in the northern jurisdiction of the United States to secede. Copies of the minutes of the meeting held to discuss that matter are still in existence in safe hands, and that all that secrecy emphasizes the power of the masterminds of the Illuminati to prevent such terrible events of history from being taught in our schools. In the early 1850s, the Illuminati held a secret meeting in New York, which was addressed by a British Illuminist named Wright. Those in attendance were told that the Illuminati was organizing to unite nihilist and atheist groups with all other subversive groups into an international to be known as communists. That was when the word communist first came into being, and it was intended to be the supreme weapon and scare them to terrify the whole world and drive the terrorized peoples into the Illuminati one-world scheme. This scheme, communism, was to be used to enable the Illuminati to foment future wars and revolutions. Clinton Roosevelt, a direct ancestor of Franklin Roosevelt, Horace Greeley and Charles Damon, foremost newspaper publishers of that time, were appointed to head a committee to raise funds for the new venture. Of course, most of the funds were provided by the Rothschilds. And this fund was used to finance Karl Marx and Engels when they wrote Das Kapital, and the Communist Manifesto in Soho,
These guys got
England.
the key.
And this clearly reveals that communism is not a so-called ideology, but a secret weapon, a boogeyman word to serve the purpose of the Illuminati. Weishaupt died in 1830, but prior to his death he prepared a revised version of the age-old conspiracy, the Illuminati, which, under various aliases, was to organize, finance, direct, and control all international organizations by working their agents into executive positions at the top. In the United States, we have Woodrow Wilson, Franklin Roosevelt, Jack Kennedy, Johnson, Rusk, McNamara, Fulbright, etc. as prime
They're just
ministers.
killing them, aren't they? They're just killing the
In
people.
addition, while Karl Marx was writing the Communist Manifesto under the direction of one group of Illuminists, Professor Karl Ritter of Frankfurt University was writing the antithesis under direction of another group. The idea was that those who direct the overall conspiracy would use the differences in those two so-called ideologies to enable them to divide larger and larger members of the human race into opposing camps so that they could be armed and then brainwashed into fighting and destroying each other, and particularly to destroy all political and religious institutions. The work Ritter started was continued after his death and completed by the German so-called philosopher Friedrich Wilhelm Nietzsche, who founded Nietzscheism. This Nietzscheism was later developed into fascism and then into Nazism, and was used to foment World Wars I and II. In 1834, the Italian revolutionary leader Giuseppe Mazzini was selected by the Illuminati to direct their revolutionary program throughout the world. He served in that capacity until he died in 1872. But some years before he died, Mazzini had enticed an American general named Albert Pike into the Illuminati. Pike was fascinated by the idea of a one-world government, and ultimately he became the head of this Luciferian conspiracy. Between 1859 and 1871, Pike worked out a military blueprint for 3 world wars and various revolutions throughout the world, which he considered would forward the conspiracy to its final stage in the 20th century. Again, I remind that these conspirators were never concerned with immediate success. They always operated on a long-range view. Pike did most of his work in his home in Little Rock, Arkansas. But a few years later, when the Illuminati's lodges of the Grand Orient became suspect and repudiated because of Mazzini's revolutionary activities in Europe, Pike organized what he called the New and Reformed Palladian Rite. He set up 3 Supreme Councils, one in Charleston, South Carolina, one in Rome, Italy, and the 3rd in Berlin, Germany. He had Mazzini establish 23 subordinate councils in strategic locations throughout the world. These have been the secret headquarters of the world revolutionary movement ever since. Long before Marconi invented radio, the scientists in the Illuminati had found the means for Pike and the heads of his councils to communicate secretly. It was the discovery of that secret that enabled intelligence officers to understand how apparently unrelated incidents, one such as the assassination of an Austrian prince in Sarajevo, took place simultaneously throughout the world, which developed into a war or a revolution. Pike's plan was as simple as it has proved effective. It called for communism, Nazism, political Zionism, and other international movements to be organized and used to foment 3 global world wars and at least 2 major revolutions. The First World War was to be fought so as to enable the Illuminati to destroy Tsarism in Russia. as vowed by Rothschild after the Tsar had torpedoed his scheme at the Congress in Vienna, and to transform Russia into a stronghold of atheistic communism. The differences stirred up by agents of the Illuminati between the British and German empires
Too many people here!
opposing this war. After the war would be ended, communism was to be built up and used to destroy other governments and weaken religion. World War II, when and if necessary, was to be fomented by using the controversies between fascists and political scientists. And here
Auto drive now enabled.
that Hitler was financed by Krupp, the Warburg, the Rothschilds, and other internationalist bankers, and that the slaughter of the supposed 600,000 Jews by Hitler didn't bother the Jewish internationalist bankers at all. That slaughter was necessary in order to create worldwide hatred of the German people and thus bring about the war against them. In short, this Second World War was to be fought to destroy Nazism and to increase the power of political science so that the state of Israel could be established in Palestine. During this World War, international communism would be built up until it equaled its strength
Auto
that
drive.
of the United Christendom. When it reached that point, it was to be contained and kept in check until required for the final social cataclysm. As we know now, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin put that exact policy into effect, and Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, and Johnson continued that same exact policy. World War III is to be fomented by using the so-called controversies, the agents of the Illuminati, operating under whatever new name, are now stirring up between the political Zionists and the leaders of the Muslim world. That war is to be directed in such a manner that all of Islam and political Zionists, Israel, will destroy each other, while at the same time, the remaining nations, once more divided on this issue, will be forced to fight themselves into a state of complete exhaustion, physically, mentally, spiritually, and economically. How can any thinking person doubt that the intrigue now going on in the Near, Middle, and Far East is designed to accomplish that satanic objective? Pike himself foretold all this in a statement he made to the Senate on August 15, 1871. Pike stated that after World War III is ended, those who will inspire to undisputed world domination will promote the greatest social cataclysm the world has ever known. Including his own work,
Shit, I didn't
the letter
understand.
he wrote to Mazzini, and which letter
Oops.
is now copyrighted in the British Museum in London, England. He said, "We shall unleash the nihilists and the atheists, and we shall provoke a great social cataclysm which in all its horror will show clearly to all nations the effect of absolute atheism, the origin of savagery, and of most bloody turmoil. Then everywhere, the people forced to defend themselves against the world minority of revolutionaries will exterminate those destroyers of civilization, and the multitudes disillusioned with Christianity, whose deistic spirits will be from that moment on without direction and leadership, and anxious for an ideal but without knowledge where to send its adoration, will receive the true light through the universal manifestation of the pure doctrine of Lucifer, brought finally out into public view, a manifestation which will result from a general reactionary movement which will follow the destruction of Christianity and atheism, both conquered and exterminated at the same time." When Mazzini died in 1872,
What's going on?
Pike made another Italian revolutionary leader named Adrian Lemmy his successor. Lemmy, in turn, was succeeded by Lenin and Trotsky, then by Stalin. The revolutionary activities of all those men were financed by British, French, German, and American international bankers, all of them dominated by the House of Rothschild. We are supposed to believe that the international bankers of today, like the money changers of Christ's day, are only the tools or agents of the great conspiracy. But actually, they are the masterminds behind all of it. While the general public has been brainwashed by all the mass communications media into believing that communism is a movement of the so-called workers, the actual fact is that both British and American intelligence officers have authentic documentary evidence that international liberals operating through their international banking houses, particularly the House of Rothschild, have financed both sides in every war and revolution since 1776. Those who today comprise the conspiracy, the CFR in the United States, direct our governments, whom they hold in usury through such methods as the Federal Reserve System in America, to fight wars such as Vietnam, created by the United Nations, so as to further fight
Hacked vehicle identified.
to bring
Searching
the
for the
world
source.
to that stage of the conspiracy when atheistic communists and the whole of Christianity can be forced to call out those words within each remaining nation.
Oh shit, damn.
The headquarters of the great conspiracy in the late 1700s was in Frankfurt, Germany, where the House of Rothschild had been established by Mayor Anschel, who adopted the Rothschild name and linked together other international financiers who had literally sold their souls to the devil. After the Bavarian government's exposure in 1786, the conspirators moved their headquarters to Switzerland, then to London. Since World War II, after Jacob Schiff, the Rothschild boy in America,
Auto drive now enabled.
the headquarters of the American branch has been in the Harold Pratt Building, New York, and the Rockefellers, originally proteges,
Search complete.
have
Sync
taken
time
over
codes.
the manipulation
Yeah.
of finances in America or Vietnam. In the final phase of the conspiracy, the Hungarian government insists that
Oh, I can
Auto
walk
drive now
this.
disabled.
Now let me show you how the federal government and the American people have been sucked into the one-world takeover plot of the Illuminati Great Conspiracy. And always bear in mind that the United Nations was created to become the housing for that one-world so-called liberal conspiracy. The real foundations of the plot for the takeover of the United States were laid during the period of our Civil War. Not that Weishaupt was the earlier mastermind that ever overlooked his word. As I have previously indicated, Weishaupt had his agents planted over here as far back as the Revolutionary War. But George Washington was more than a match for him. It was during the Civil War that the conspirators launched their first concrete effort. We know that Judah Benjamin, chief advisor of Jefferson Davis, was a Rothschild agent. We also know that there were Rothschild agents planted in Abraham Lincoln's cabinet who tried to sell him into a financial deal with the House of Rothschild. But old age saw through the scheme and bluntly rejected it, thereby encouraged the undying enmity of the Rothschilds, exactly as the Russian Tsar did when he torpedoed their first League of Nations at the Congress in Vienna. Investigation of the assassination of Lincoln revealed that the assassin, Booth, was a member of a secret conspiratorial group. Because there were a number of highly important government officials involved, the name of the group was never revealed, and it became a mystery, exactly as the assassination of Jack Kennedy still is a mystery. But I am sure it will not for long. Anyway, the ending of the Civil War destroyed, temporarily, all chances of the House of Rothschild to get a clutch on our money system, such as they had acquired in Britain and other nations in Europe. I say temporarily because the Rothschilds and the masterminds of the conspiracy never quit. So they had to start from scratch, but they lost no time in getting started. Shortly after the Civil War, a young immigrant who called himself Jacob H. Schiff arrived in New York. Jacob was a young man with a mission for the House of Rothschild. Jacob was the son of a rabbi, born in one of Rothschild's houses in Frankfurt, Germany. I won't go deeply into his background. The important point is that Rothschild recognized in him not only a potential money wizard, but more important, he also saw the latent Machiavellian qualities of Jacob that could, as it did, make him an invaluable functionary in the great one-world conspiracy. After a comparatively brief training period in the Rothschilds' London bank, Jacob left for America with instructions to buy into a banking house, which was to be the springboard to acquire control of the money system of the United States. Actually, Jacob came here to carry out 4 specific assignments. Number 1, and most important, was to acquire control of America's money system. Number 2, find desirable men who, for a price, would be willing to serve as stooges for the great conspiracy and promote them into high places in our federal government, our Congress, and the U.S. Supreme Court, and all federal agencies. Number 3, create minority group strife throughout the nation, particularly between whites and blacks. Number 4, create a movement to destroy religion in the United States, but Christianity to be the chief target. Earlier, I stated that Jacob Schiff came to America with orders by Rothschild to carry out 4 specific directives.
While he still can.
The first and most important one was to get control of the United States system. Let's trace Schiff's steps to accomplish that directive. As a first step, he had to buy into a bank account. It had to be the kind
Thank
of a
you
house
for
that
sleeping
he could
now.
absolutely control and move for that primary objective of entrapping our U.S. money system. After carefully scouting around, Jacob bought a partnership in a firm that called itself Kcin & Loeb. Like Schiff, Kcin & Loeb were immigrants from German Jewish ghettos. They came to the United States in the mid-1840s. Both started their business careers as itinerant pack peddlers. In the early 1850s, they pooled their interests and set up a merchandising store in Lafayette, Indiana, under the firm name of Kcin & Loeb, servicing the covered wagon settlers on their way west. In the years that followed, they set up similar stores in Cincinnati and St. Louis. Then they added pawnbroking to their merchandising pursuits. From that to money lending was a short and quick step. By the time Schiff arrived on the scene, Kcin & Loeb was a well-known private banking firm, and this is the firm Jacob bought into. Shortly after he became a partner in Kcin & Loeb, Schiff married Loeb's daughter, Teresa. Then he bought out Kcin's interests and moved the firm to New York, and Kcin & Loeb became Kcin, Loeb & Company, international bankers, with Jacob Schiff, agent of the Rothschilds, ostensibly the sole owner. And throughout his career, this blend of Judas and Machiavelli, the first hierarch of the Illuminati, great conspiracy in America, posed as a generous philanthropist and a man of great holiness, the cover-up policy set forth by the Illuminati. As I have stated, the first great step of the conspiracy was to be the entrapment of our money system. To achieve that objective, Schiff had to get full cooperation of the then big banker elements in America. And that was easier said than done. Even in those years, Wall Street was the heart of the American money market, and J.P. Morgan was its dictator. Next in line were the Drexels and the Biddles in Philadelphia. All the other financiers, big and little, danced to the music of those three houses, but particularly to that of Morgan. All of those three were proud, haughty, arrogant potentates. For the first few years, they viewed the little bewhiskered man from the German ghettos with utter contempt. But Jacob knew how to overcome that. He threw a few Rothschild bones to them. Said bones being distribution in America of desirable European stock and bond issue. Then he discovered he had a still more potent weapon in his hands in the following. It was in the decades following our Civil War that our industries began to burgeon. We had great railroads to build. The oil, mining, steel, textile industries were bursting out of their swaddling clothes. All that called for vast financing. Much of that financing had to come from abroad. That meant the House of Rothschild. And that was when Schiff came into his own. He played a very crafty game. He became the patron saint of John D. Rockefeller, Edward R. Harrison, and Andrew Carnegie. He financed the Standard Oil Company for Rocky, the railroad empire for Harrison, and the steel empire for Carnegie. But instead of hogging all the other industries for Q. Logan Company, he opened the doors of the House of Rothschild to Morgan, Biddle, and Drexel. In turn, Rothschild arranged the setting up of London, Paris, European, and other branches for those three, but always in partnership with Rothschild subordinates. And Rothschild made it very clear to all those men that Schiff was to be the boss in New York. Thus, at the turn of the century, Schiff had a tight control of the entire banking fraternity on Wall Street, which by then, with Schiff's help, included Lehman Brothers, Goldman Sachs, and other internationalist banks, headed by men chosen by the Rothschilds. In short, that meant control of the nation's money power, and he was then ready for a giant step in the practice of our national money system. Now, under our Constitution, all control of our money system is vested solely in our Congress. Schiff's next important step was to seduce our Congress to betray that constitutional edict by surrendering that control to the hierarchy of the Illuminati's great conspiracy. In order to legalize that surrender and thus make the people powerless to resist it, it would be necessary to have Congress enact special legislation. To accomplish that, Schiff would have to infiltrate stooges into both houses of Congress. Stooges powerful enough to railroad Congress into passing such legislation. Equally, or even more important, he would have to plant a stooge in the White House. President without integrity and without scruples, who would sign that legislation into law. To accomplish that, he had to get control of either the Republican or the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party was the more vulnerable. It was the hungrier of the two parties.
Well, I can't hate it when you do that. You can't get on it straight away and start it up.
Since before the Civil War, there were two reasons. Number one, poverty of the party. Number two, there were considerably more Republican-minded voters than Democrats. The poverty matter was not a great problem, but the voter problem was a different story. As I previously said, Schiff was a smart cookie. Here is the atrocious and murderous method he employed to solve that voter problem. His solution emphasizes how very little the Jewish internationalist bankers care about their own racial revenue, as you shall see. Suddenly, around 1890, there broke out a nationwide series of pogroms in Russia. Many, many thousands of innocent Jews, men, women, and children were slaughtered by the Cossacks and other peasants. Similar pogroms with similar slaughter of innocent Jews broke out in Poland, Romania, and Bulgaria. All those pogroms were fomented by Rothschild agents. As a result, Jewish terrified refugees from all those nations swarmed into the United States. That continued throughout the next 2 or 3 decades because the pogroms were continuous through all those years. All those refugees were aided by self-styled humanitarian committees set up by Schiff, the Rothschilds, and all the Rothschild affiliates. In the main, the refugees streamed into New York. But the Schiff Rothschild humanitarian committees found ways to shuffle many of them into other large cities, such as Chicago, Boston, Philadelphia, Detroit, Los Angeles, etc. All of them were quickly transformed to naturalized citizens and educated to register as Democrats. Thus, all of that so-called minority group became solid Democratic voter blocs in their communities, all controlled and maneuvered by their so-called benefactors. And shortly after the turn of the century, they became vital factors to the political life of our nation. That was one of the methods Schiff employed to plant men like Nelson Aldrich in our Senate and Woodrow Wilson in the White House. At this point, let me remind you of another of the important jobs that was assigned to Schiff when he was dispatched to America. I refer to the job of destroying the unity of the American people by creating minority group and racial strife. By the pogrom-driven Jewish refugees into America, Schiff was creating one ready-made minority group for that purpose. But the Jewish people as a whole, made fearful by the pogroms, could not be depended upon to create the violence necessary to destroy the unity of the American people. But right within America, there was an already made-to-order, although as yet a sleeping minority group, the Negroes, who could be sparked into so-called demonstrations, rioting, looting, murder, and every other type of lawlessness. All that was necessary was to incite and arouse them. Together, those two minority groups, properly maneuvered, could be used to create exactly the kind of strife in America the Illuminati would need to accomplish their objective. Thus, at the same time that Schiff and his co-conspirators were laying their plans for the entrapment of our money system, they were also perfecting plans to hit the unsuspecting American people with an explosive and terrifying racial upheaval that would tear the people into hate fractions and create chaos throughout the nation.
It's happening now, guys. Whoops.
University campus, all protected by a world-already decision and our so-called leaders in worship. Of course, perfecting those plans required time and infinitely patient organization. Now, to remove all doubts, I'll take a few moments to give you documentary proof of this racial strife plot. First of all, they had to create leaderships and organizations to draw in millions of troops, both Jewish and Negro, who were prone to demonstrating and commit the rioting, looting, and lawlessness. So in 1909, Schiff, the Layman, and other conspirators organized and set up the National Association for the Advancement of the Colored People, known as the NAACP. The presidents, directors, and legal counsel of the NAACP were always white men.
Yep, what that means, Black Lives Matter, guys. Antifa, it's all pre-designed to cause it all.
This place not looking so good.
The entire great conspiracy. Today, this sinister ADL maintains over 2,000 agencies in all parts of the country, and they advise and completely control every action of the NAACP,
Auto drive now enabled.
American League, all the other so-called Negro civil rights organizations throughout the nation, including such leaders as Martin Lucifer King, Stokely Carmichael, Bayard Rustin, and others of that ilk. In addition, the AGL acquired absolute control of the advertising budgets of many department stores, hotel chains, and TV and radio industrialist sponsors.
Seriously.
Also advertising agents.
MI5, innit? GCHQ.
Auto drive now disabled.
MI6, is it? Or whatever it is.
All the mass communication means. Of course, every sight at the same time creates sympathy.
Where 007 lives, innit?
Here is documentary proof the beginning of their deliberate plot
Oh, look.
to foment the Negroes and all their laws. Around 1910, one Israel banker wrote a play entitled The Melting Pot. It was sheer propaganda to incite the Negroes and slaves. Because the play reportedly visualized how the American people were discriminating against and persecuting Jews and Negroes. At that time, nobody seemed to realize that it was a propaganda play. It was that cleverly written. The propaganda was well wrapped up, and the truly great entertainment in the play, and it was a big Broadway hit. Now, in those years, the legendary Diamond Jim Brady used to throw a banquet at the famous Delmonico restaurant in New York after the opening performance of a popular play. He threw such a party for the cast of The Melting Pot, its author, producer, and chosen Broadway celebrity. By then, I was in a personal mark on the Broadway theater and was invited to that party. There I met George Bernard Shaw and a Jewish writer named Israel Cohen. Zangwill, Shaw, and Cohen were the triumvirate who created the Fabian Society in England.
Oh, shit.
But remember, at that time, both Marxism and communism were just emerging, and nobody paid much attention to either. And nobody suspected the propaganda in the writings of those three really brilliant writers. At that time, Israel Cohen told me he was then engaged in writing a book to be a follow-up on Zangwill's The Melting Pot. The title of his book was to be Racial Programs for the 20th Century. At that time, I was completely absorbed by my work as a playwright. And significant as that title was, its real objective never dawned on me, nor was I interested in reading the book. But it suddenly hit me with the force of a hydrogen bomb when I received a newspaper clipping of an item published by the Washington, D.C. Evening Star in May 1957. That item was a verbatim reprint of the following excerpt in Israel Cohen's book, A Racial Program for the 20th Century. And it reads, as I quote, "We must realize that our party's most powerful weapon is racial tension. By propounding into the consciousness of the dark races that for centuries they have been oppressed by the whites, we can move them to the program of the Communist Party. In America, we will aim for subtle victory. While inflaming the Negro minority against the whites, we will instill in the whites a guilt complex for their exploitation of the Negroes. We will aid the Negroes to rise to prominence in every walk of life, in the professions and in the world of sports and entertainment. With this prestige, the Negro will be able to intermarry with the whites and begin a process which will deliver America to our call." That same excerpt was entered into the Congressional Record of June 7, 1957 by Representative Thomas G. Taberner. Thus the authenticity of that passage of Cohen's book was fully established.
Getting good, yeah.
But the one question that remained in my mind was whether it represented the official policy or plot of the Communist Party, or just a personal expression of Cohen himself. Hence I sought more proof, and I found it. In an official pamphlet published in 1935 by the New York Communist Party's official Workers' Library Publishing.
Let's try again, go for it again. I'm looking at the cars, though.
Soviet America. for admission to the Soviet Union. It contained a firm pledge that the revolt would be supported by all American Reds and all so-called liberals. On page 38, it promised that a Soviet government would confer greater benefits to Negroes than to whites. And again, this official communist pamphlet pledged that, I quote, any act of discrimination or prejudice against a Negro will become a crime under the revolutionary law, unquote. That statement proved, and the excerpt in Israel Cohen's book, published in 1913, was an official edict of the Communist Party and directly in line with the Illuminati blueprint for world revolution issued by Weishaupt and later by Albert White. Now there's only one question, and that is the proof that the communist regime is directly controlled by the American Jacob Schiff and London Rothschild masterminds of the Great Conspiracy. A little later, I will provide that proof that will remove even a remote doubt that the Communist Party, as we know, was created by those masterminds, capitalists, if you will note, that Schiff, the Wadens, and the Rothschilds planned to violate also the murder of the Bowery family, and that Lenin, Trotsky, and Stalin took their orders directly from Schiff and the other capitalists who they supposedly are fighting. Now can you see why the viler war that influenced the Christmas segregation petition in 1954? It was to aid and abet the plot of the Illuminati conspirators to create tension and strife between Negroes and whites. Can you see why the same Earl Warren issued his decision prohibiting Christian prayers and Christmas carols in our schools, which was done to destroy Christianity? Can you see why Eisenhower, despite all the rigid constitutional prohibitions, sent federal troops into a southern state to enforce the desegregation decision? Why Kennedy did likewise? And can you see why Johnson and 66 senators, despite the protests of 90% of the American people, voted for the consular treaty, which opens our entire country to Russian spies and saboteurs? All those 66 senators are 20th century Benedict Arnolds. It is up to you and you, all of the American people, to force Congress, our elected servants, to haul in those American traitors for impeachments, and that when proven guilty, they all be given the punishment prescribed for traitors who aid and abet our enemies. And that includes the forcing of rigid investigations by Congress of the CFR and all their fronts, such as the ADL, the NAACP, SNCC, and such Illuminati tools as non-exclusive. Such investigations will completely unmask all the leaders in Washington and the Illuminati and all their affiliations and affiliates as traitors carrying out the Illuminati plot. It will completely unmask the United Nations as the intended crux of the entire plot and force Congress to take the U.S. out of the UN and hurl the UN out of the U.S. In fact, it will destroy the UN and the entire plot. Before I close this phase, I wish to reiterate and stress one vital point, which I urge you to never forget if you wish to save our country for your children and their children. Here is the point. Every unconstitutional and unlawful act committed by Woodrow Wilson, Franklin Roosevelt, by Truman, Eisenhower, and Kennedy, and are now being committed by Johnson, is exactly in line with the Illuminati conspirators' centuries-old plot outlined by Weishaupt and Albert White. Every vicious decision issued by the traitorous Earl Warren and his equally traitorous Supreme Court justices was directly in line with what the Illuminati blueprint requires. That all the treason committed by our State Department under Rush, and earlier by John Foster Dulles and Marshall, also all the treason committed by McNamara and his predecessors, is directly in line with that same Illuminati blueprint for the takeover of the world. Also, the amazing treason by various members of our Congress, especially by the 66 senators who signed for the consular treaty, has been committed on orders from the Illuminati. Now I will get back to Jacob Schiff's entrapment of our money system and the treasonous actions that followed. It will also reveal the Schiff Rothschild control of not only Karl Marx, but of Lenin, Trotsky, and Stalin, who created the revolution in Russia and set up the Communist Party. It was in 1908 that Schiff decided the time had come for his seizure of our money system. His chief lieutenants in that seizure, Colonel Edward Mandel House, whose entire career was that of chief executive and courier for Schiff, as I shall show, Bernard Baruch, and Herbert Lehman. In the fall of that year, they assembled in secret conclave at the Jekyll Island Country Club, owned by J.P. Morgan at Jekyll Island, Georgia. Among those present were J.P. Morgan, John D. Rockefeller, Colonel House, Senator Nelson Aldrich, Schiff, Stillman and Vanderlip of the New York National City Bank, W.M.J. Seligman, Eugene Meyer, Bernard Baruch, Herbert Lehman, Paul Warburg, in short, all of the international bankers in America, all of them members of the hierarchy of the Illuminati's great conspiracy. A week later, they emerged with what they called the Federal Reserve System. Senator Aldrich was the stooge who was to railroad it through Congress. But they held that railroading in abeyance for one chief reason. They would first have to plant their man, an obedient stooge, in the White House to sign the Federal Reserve Act into law. They knew that even if the Senate would pass that act unanimously, the then newly elected President Taft would promptly veto it. So they waited. In 1912, their man, Woodrow Wilson, was elected to the presidency. Immediately after Wilson was inaugurated, Senator Aldrich railroaded the Federal Reserve Act through both houses of Congress, and Wilson promptly signed it, and the Federal Reserve Act became law. That heinous act of treason was committed in December 23, 1913, 2 days before Christmas, when all the members of Congress, except for several carefully picked representatives and 3 equally carefully picked senators, were away from Washington. How heinously treasonous was that act? I'll tell you. Our founding fathers knew full well the power of money. They knew that whoever had that power held the destiny of our nation in his hands. Therefore, they carefully guarded this power when they set forth in the Constitution that Congress, the elected representatives of the people, alone would have that power. The constitutional language on this point is brief, concise, and specific, stated in Article 1, Section 8, Paragraph 5, defining the duties and powers of Congress, and I quote, "To coin money, regulate the value thereof, and abhor it, and the standard of weights and measures," unquote. But on that tragic, unforgettable day of infamy, December 23, 1913, the men we sent to Washington to safeguard our interests, the representatives and senators and Woodrow Wilson, delivered the destiny of our nation into the hands of 2 aliens from Eastern Europe, Jacob Schiff and Paul Warburg. Warburg was a very recent immigrant who came here on orders from Rothschild for the express purpose of blueprinting that foul Federal Reserve Act. Now, the vast majority of the American people think that the Federal Reserve System is the United States government-owned agency.
Nope.
That is positively false. All of the stock of the Federal Reserve banks is owned by the member banks, and the heads of the member banks are all members of the hierarchy of the great Illuminati conspiracy known today as the CFR. The details of that act of treason in which many traitors, so-called Americans, participated are far too long for this recording. But all those details are available in a book entitled The Federal Reserve Conspiracy, written by Eustace Mullins. In that book, Mullins tells the entire horrifying story and backs it up with unquestionable documentation. Aside from it being a truly fascinating and shocking story of that great betrayal, every American should read it as a matter of vital intelligence for the time when the whole American people will finally come awake and smash the entire conspiracy. And with God's help, that awakening will surely come. You can get a copy of that book from the publisher, the Christian Educational Association, 530 Chestnut Street, Union, New Jersey. Now, if you think that those aliens, and there by accident of birth American co-conspirators, would be content with just the control of our money system, you're in for another very sad shock. The Federal Reserve System gave the conspirators complete control of our money system, but it in no way touched the earnings of the people, because the Constitution positively forbids what is now known as the 20% withholding tax. But the Illuminati blueprint for one world enslavement called for the confiscation of all private property and control of individual earning power. This, and Karl Marx stressed that feature in his blueprint, had to be accomplished by a progressive graduated income tax. As I stated,
A scampton
such a
tax.
tax could not lawfully be imposed upon the American people. It is succinctly and expressly forbidden by our Constitution. Thus, only an amendment to the Constitution could give the federal government such confiscatory power. Well, that too was not an insurmountable problem for our Machiavellian plotter. The same elected leaders in both houses of Congress, the same Mr. Woodrow Wilson, who signed the infamous Federal Reserve Act into law, amended the Constitution to make the federal income tax, known as the 16th Amendment, a law of the land. Both are illegal under our Constitution. In short, the same traitors signed both betrayals, the Federal Reserve Act and the 16th Amendment into law. However, it seems that nobody ever realized that the 16th Amendment was set up to rob, and I do mean rob, the people of their earnings via the income tax provision. The plotters didn't fully use that provision until World War II, when that brave humanitarian, Franklin Roosevelt, applied a 20% withholding tax on all small wage earners and up to 90% on higher wage earners. Oh, of course, he faithfully promised that it would be only for the duration of the war. But what was a promise to such a charlatan who in 1940, when he was running for his third term, kept proclaiming, I'll say again and again and again, that I will never send American boys to fight on foreign soil. Remember? He was proclaiming that even as he was already preparing the conclusion.
It's taking some time, this.
By enticing the Japanese into that sneak attack on Pearl Harbor to furnish him with his excuse. And before I forget, let me remind you that another charlatan named Woodrow Wilson used exactly that same campaign slogan in 1916. His slogan was, re-elect the man who will keep your sons out of the war. Exactly the same formula, exactly the same promise. But wait, as Al Jolson used to say, you ain't heard nothing yet. That 16th Amendment income tax trap was intended to confiscate, rob, the earnings only of the common herd, you and me. It was not intended to even touch the huge incomes of the Illuminati gang, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, the Lehmans, and all the other conspirators. So together with that 16th Amendment, they created what they called the tax-free foundation. That would enable the conspirators to transform their huge wealth into such so-called foundations
guys.
and avoid payment of virtually all income taxes.
We've got to stop it for a sec. Back again. I decided because I think I only set the recording up to an hour and a half.
All the civil rights movements that are creating all the chaos and rioting all over the country. They financed the Martin Lucifer King. The Ford Foundation finances the Center for the Study of Democratic Institutions in Santa Barbara, commonly referred to as Moscow West, and which is headed by Wonderboy Hutchins, Walter Reuther, Irwin Cannon, and others of that ilk. In short, the tax-free foundation financed those who are doing the job for the Illuminati Great Conspiracy. And what are the hundreds of billions of dollars they confiscate every year from the earnings of the common herd, you and me, used for? Well, for one thing, there's a foreign aid gift, which gave billions to communist Tito, plus gifts of hundreds of jet planes, many of which were turned over to Castro, plus the costs of training communist pilots so that they can the better shoot down our planes, billions to Red Poland, billions to India, billions to Sukarno, billions to other enemies of the United States. That's what that treasonously railroaded 16th Amendment has done to our nation, to the American people, to you and to me, to your children and their children. Our CFR Illuminati-controlled federal government can grant tax-free status to all foundations and pro-red one-word outfits, such as the Fund for the Republic. But if you, or a patriotic pro-organization, is too outspokenly pro-American, they can terrify and intimidate you by finding a misplaced comma in your income tax report, and by threatening you with penalties, fines, and even prison. Future historians will wonder how the American people could have been so naive and stupid as to have permitted such audaciously brazen acts of treason as the Federal Reserve Act of the 16th Amendment. Well, they were not naive and they were not stupid. The answer is they trusted the men they elected to safeguard our country and our people. And they just didn't have even an inkling about either betrayal until after each one had been accomplished. It was the Illuminati-controlled mass communications media that kept and is keeping our people naive and stupid and unaware of the treason being committed. Now the great question is, when will the people wake up and do to our traitors of today what George Washington and our founding fathers would have done to Benedict Arnold? Actually, Benedict Arnold was a petty traitor compared to our present traitors in Washington. Now let's go back to the events that followed the rape of our Constitution by the passage of the Federal Reserve Act, the 16th Amendment. With Wilson completely under their control, the masterminds of the Great Conspiracy put in motion their next, and what they hope will be their final steps to achieve their one-world government. The first of those steps was to be World War I. Why war? Simple. The only excuse for a one-world government is that it will supposedly ensure peace. The only thing that can make people cry for peace is war. War brings chaos, destruction, exhaustion, to winner as well as to loser. It brings economic ruin to both. Most important, it destroys the flower of the young man with a quote. To the saddened and heartbroken oldsters, the mothers and fathers, who are left with nothing but memories of their beloved sons, peace becomes worth any price. And that is the emotion upon which the conspirators depend for the success of their satanic plot. Throughout the 19th century, from 1814 to 1914, the world as a whole was at peace. Such wars as the Franco-Prussian, our own Civil War, the Russo-Japanese War, were what might be termed local disturbances that did not affect the rest of the world. All the great nations were prosperous. The people staunchly nationalistic and fiercely proud of their sovereignty. It was utterly unthinkable that the French and the German peoples would be willing to live under a one-world government.
This is a difficult one, this.
Or the Chinese and the Japanese, even more unthinkable that a Kaiser Wilhelm, or a Franz Joseph, or a Tsar Nicholas, or anyone would willingly and meekly surrender his throne to a one-world government. But bear in mind that the peoples in all nations are the real power, and only one thing, war, would make the people yearn and clamor for a peace-ensuring one-world government. But it would have to be a frightful and horribly devastating war. It could not be just a local disturbing war between just two nations. It would have to be a world war. No major nation must be left untouched by the horrors and devastation.
So I'm looking there.
The cry for peace must be made universal. Actually, that was the format set by the Illuminati and Nathan Rothschild at the turn of the 19th century. They first maneuvered all of Europe into the Napoleonic War. Then the Congress in Vienna, which they, and particularly Rothschild, planned to transform into a League of Nations, which was to have been the housing for their one-world government, exactly as the present United Nations was set up to be the housing for the forthcoming, God forbid, one-world government. Anyway, that was the format the House of Rothschild and Jacob Schiff
doing mind control.
to achieve their objective in 1914. Of course, they knew that that same format had failed in 1814, but they theorized that was only because the Tsar of Russia had torpedoed that scheme. Well, the present 1914 would eliminate that 1814 fly in the ointment. They'd make sure that after the New World War, they were conspiring with those Tsar of Russia around to throw monkey wrenches into the machinery. I will go into how they accomplished this first step along a world war. History records that World War I was precipitated by a trivial incident, the kind of incident both Weishaupt and Albert Pike had incorporated in their blueprints. That incident was the assassination of an Austrian archduke, arranged by the Illuminati master. The war followed. It involved Germany, Austria-Hungary, and their allies, so-called the Axis powers against France, Britain, and Russia, called the Allies. Only the United States was not involved during the first 2 years. By 1970, the conspirators had achieved their primary objective. All of Europe was in a state of destitution. All the peoples were war-weary and crying for peace. And the outcome too was all set. It was to come as soon as the United States would be hurled in on the side of the Allies. And that was all set to happen immediately after Wilson's re-election. After that, there could be only one outcome: complete victory for the Allies. To fully confirm my statement that long before 1917, the conspiracy, headed in America by Jacob Schiff, had it all set to hurl the United States into that war, I will cite the proof. When Wilson was campaigning for re-election in 1916, his chief appeal was, re-elect the man who will keep your sons out of the war. But during that same campaign, the Republican Party publicly charged that Wilson had long committed himself to throw us into the war. They charged that if he would be defeated, he would accomplish that act during his few remaining months in office. But if re-elected, he would hold off until after re-election. But at that time, the American people looked upon Wilson as a god. Well, Wilson was re-elected, and as per the schedule of the conspiracy,
Proceed to alarm location.
1917. He used the sinking of the Lusitania as an excuse, a sinking which also was prearranged. Roosevelt, also a god-man in the eyes of the American people, followed the same technique in 1941 when he used the prearranged Pearl Harbor attack as his excuse for hurling us into World War II. Now, exactly as the conspirators planned, victory for the Allies would eliminate all the monarchs of the defeated nation and leave all their peoples leaderless, confused, bewildered, and perfectly conditioned for the one-world government the great conspiracy intended to follow. But there still would be an obstacle, the same obstacle that had fought. the Illuminati and Rothschild at the Congress in Vienna peace gathering after the Napoleonic War. Russia would be on the winning side this time, as it was in 1814. Therefore, the Tsar would be securely on his throne. Here it is pertinent to note that Russia, under the Tsarist regime, had been the one country in which the Illuminati had never made any headway, nor had the Rothschilds ever been able to infiltrate their banking interests. Thus, a winning Tsar, before difficult and never difficult, even if he could be enticed into a so-called League of Nations, it was a foregone conclusion that he would never, but never go for a one-world government. So even before the outbreak of World War I, the conspirators had a plan in the making to carry out Nathan Rothschild's vow of 1814.
Oh, that was close. Don't drive down the wrong way. The main road. Right, okay, let's go for it.
And the Russian Bolsheviki would keep their instruments in this particular plot. From the turn of the century, the chiefs
We're back. The computer crashed out, so you will be beginning from the pub. What are you doing climbing over that? Oh, hello.
Control to all units. Possible hostiles near your location.
We're on their tail. Over.
He was organizing the plot for the takeover of Russia. In short, he was kept so busy with all those jobs that he completely overlooked the supreme job of acquiring complete control of our mass communications media. That oversight, direct cause to Wilson's failure to rule the United States.
Alright, so did you walk in the pub? Oops.
There's our target. Over.
Whoa.
I'm in pursuit of the target.
Okay, now he jumped. Right, let's do it here. Let's stay here. Just trying something.
There were no left, there were no rights. No prejudices or practice exploitation. Thus, Wilson's League of Nations fell on their
Suspect is unsighted. Unsighted sweeping area.
The conspirators were humanitarian. He quickly abandoned his
Yes, baby, yes!
returned to Washington, where he shortly died an imbecile brought on by syphilis.
Oh.
Control, we're heading back.
Horrible for one world government. Of course, that debacle was a terrible disappointment for Master Plan, the Illuminati conspirators.
Right, okay.
But they were not disturbed.
Let's get back on it, boys and girls. Shit, it's a bit high. Oops. Yeah. Bollocks. He won't jot. Oh, there he goes. Shit.
Many of whom had abandoned their old family name and acquired new American names. For one example, we have Dillon, our Secretary of Treasury of the United States, whose original name was the Pouch.
The Pouch.
Example is Taylor, head of the CBS TV channel, whose true name was Valencia. The membership of the CFR is approximately 1,000 in number, and contains the heads of virtually every industrial empire in America, such as Blau, president of the U.S. Steel Corporation, Rockefeller, king of the oil industry, Henry Ford II, and so on. And of course, all the international bankers, also the heads of the tax-free foundations, the officers and/or master CFR members. In short, all the nations of light and money, if the elected CFR chosen president of the United States, congressmen, senators, and who decide the appointments of our various
Embassy of the United States of America. Oh, right. Is that the one we've been in? Was that in there? Oh, no, it's a different building.
Get the way up, fucking stupid thing!
Right, let's have a look this one.
Vice President of the CFR subsidiary, Barry Goldberg.
What's a picture?
The various administrations. We have John Foster Dulles, Alan Dulles, Cordell Hall, John J. McClure, Morgan Dulles, Clarence Dillon, Russ
Oh,
McNamara, and just to emphasize the red color of the CFR, we have as members such men as Alger Hiss, Ralph Bunch, Kaspolsky, Harry Dexter White, real name Weiss, Owen Lattimore, Philip Jeffy, etc., etc. Simultaneously, they were flooding thousands of homosexuals and other blackmailable characters into all the federal agencies from the White House down. Remember Johnson's great friend Jenkins and Bobby Baker? Now, there were many jobs that CFR had to They retired so their first job was to set up various subsidiaries for whom they assigned special objectives. I can't name all the subsidiaries in this recording, but the following are a few. The Foreign Policy Association, FDA, the World Affairs Council, WAC, the Business
We can do this
Advisory
easy,
Council,
or,
notorious ABS,
3 units to my location.
headed by Walter Luther. The notorious 1313 in Chicago. Barry Goldwater was, and no doubt still is, a vice president of one of the CFR subsidiaries. In addition, the CFR set up special committees in every state of the Union, to whom they assigned the various local state operations. Simultaneously, the Rothschilds set up similar CFR light control groups in England, France, Germany, and other nations to control world conditions and cooperate with CFR to bring about another world war. But the CFR's first and foremost...
I wonder if I can do it from that building. Just do...
The control of the press was assigned to Rockefeller. Thus, Henry Lewis, who recently died, was financed to set up a number of national magazines. Among them, Life, Time, Fortune, and others, which published USSR in America. The Rockefellers also directly or indirectly financed the Powell Brothers book magazine and a chain of newspapers. They also financed a man named Sam Newhouse to buy up and build a chain of newspapers all over the country. And the late Eugene Meyer, one of the founders of CFR, bought the Washington Post, Newsweek, the Weekly Magazine, and other publications. At the same time, CFR began to develop and nurture a new breed of pluralist columnists and editorial writers, such as Walter Lippmann, Lou Gearson, the Alsop, Herbert Matthews, Erwin Camp,
That's a building now, isn't it?
who called themselves liberals, proclaimed that Americanism is isolationism, that isolationism is warmongerism, that anti-communism is anti-Semitism and racism. All that took time and force, but today our entire press, except for some local small-town paper that week, published by patriotic organizations, is completely controlled by CFR students, and thus they finally succeeded in breaking us up into a nation of quarreling, wrangling, squabbling, hating factions Now, if you still wonder about the slanted news and outright lies you read in your papers, you have the answer. To the layman's Goldman Sachs, Blue Loeb, and the Warburg, the CFR assigned the job of getting control of the motion picture industry, Hollywood, radio and television, and believe you me, they succeeded. If you still wonder about the strange propaganda broadcasts by the Ed Murrow, Chet Huntley, Howard K. Smith, Eric Severite, Lou Pearson, and others of Daniels, you have the answer. If you wonder about all the smut, sex, pornography, and mixed marriage films you see in your movie theater and on your TV set, all of which is demoralizing our youth, you have the answer. The whole story of the CFR conspiracy takeover of our mass communication media is far too long.
It's a long way down.
You can find it in the news bulletin number 125, entitled How to Get the Red Out of Communication. It was published and brought up to date by the Cinema Educational Guild. It tells people how TV and radio hackney and still are used to brainwash the people, demoralize our youth. They have been and still are encouraging and creating sympathy for the rioting Negro civil rights lawlessness. You can get a copy of this newspaper by writing to the Cinema Educational Guild, Post Office Box 46205, Hollywood, California. Now to refresh your memory, let's go back further. Wilson's plot that torpedoed all chances of transforming that League of Nations into the conspirators' hoped-for one-world government housing. So the Jacob ship plot had to be done all over again. And they organized the CFR to do it. We also know how successfully the CFR did that job of brainwashing and destroying the unity of the American people. But as was the case with the ship plot, the climax and the creation of a new housing for their one-world government required another world war, a war that would be even more horrible and more devastating than the First World War, in order to get the people of the world to again clamor for peace and a means to end all war. But the CFR realized that the aftermath of World War II would have to be more carefully planned, so that there would be no state to do one-world craftsman, another League of Nations, that would emerge from the new war, the fact we now know as the United Nations. And they hit upon a perfect strategy to ensure that no escape. Here is how they did it. In 1943, in the midst of the war, they prepared the framework for the United Nations, and it was handed over to Roosevelt and the State Department to be given birth by Alger Hiss, Volsky, Dalton, Pringle, and other American statesmen, thus making the whole scheme a United States navy. Then to fix our parenthood, New York City was to become the nursery for the monstrosity. After that, we could hardly walk out on our own babies, now could we? Anyway, that's how the conspirators figured it would work. So far, it has. And the liberal Rockefeller donated the land for the United Nations building. The United Nations Charter was written by Alger Hiss of Volsky, Dalton, Trumbull, and other CFR students. A phony so-called UN conference was set up in San Francisco in 1945. All the so-called representatives of 50-odd nations gathered there, promptly signed the charter. And the despicable traitor, Alger Hiss, flew to Washington with it, elatedly submitted it to our Senate, and the Senate, elected by our people to safeguard our security, signed the charter without so much as reading it. The question is, how many of our senators were even then traitorous stooges of the CFR? Anyway, it was thus that the people accepted the United Nations as a holy abode, and enabled traitor Earl Warren to virtually destroy our Constitution by basing all his traitorous decisions on the UN Charter. thus making that charter virtually our law of the land.
Let me through.
However, for all the dirty work that had to be done to solidify these, the new housing of the one-world clock, they still required the aid of our leaders in Washington. So now I will emphasize the fiendish cleverness of the CFR master.
I'll see if I can find what set off
For
the
the
alarm.
vast majority of the American people, our foreign policy for many years has been a complete enigma. Most of us simply can't understand why this great nation is seemingly floundering so helplessly in the art of diplomacy. We can't understand why our leaders are seemingly so confused and bewildered in all their dealings with Moscow, France, and other nations, and with the UN. We always hear them proclaiming that in view of our overwhelming economic and military superiority, we must always lead from strength. Yet at all the summits and conferences, they cringe and stammer and stutter, and so to speak, come out with their tails between their hind legs. We can't understand the foreign aid to people and about enemies.
Oops.
To Poland and about enemies. To all the about communist nations. We can't understand why the expenditure of hundreds of billions of dollars has failed to slow down, let alone stop the march of communism. We are perplexed by the seeming ineptness of the State Department, the
Communism.
Defense Department, the CIA, the USIA, of all our federal agencies. Again and again and again we have been startled, shocked, bewildered, and horrified by their mistakes in Berlin, in Korea, in Laos, in Kcin, in Cuba, in Vietnam. Mistakes that always favor the enemy, never the United States. Under the law of averages,
I think it's waterproof, isn't it?
one or two mistakes
No.
in our favor, but they never did. What's the answer? The answer is the CFR and the parts played by their subsidiaries and stooges in Washington. Thus we know that complete control of our foreign relations policy is the key to the success of the entire Illuminati one-world plan. Here is a further proof. Earlier I fully established that Schiff and his gang had financed the Lenin-Trotsky Stalin takeover of Russia and fashioned its communist regime into becoming their
It's pushing it down. Yeah.
the world in turmoil, and to finally terrorize all of us into seeking peace in a huge and one-world government. But the conspirators knew that the Moscow gang could not become such an instrument of tyranny, and unless the whole world would accept the communist regime as the legitimate, pure government of Russia, only one thing could accomplish that: recognition by the United States. The conspirators figured that the whole world would follow our lead, and that's when the Wilson plot very nearly wrecked the entire plot. Throughout the following three Republican administrations, the CFR pulled every trick in their bag to induce Harding, Coolidge, and Hoover to grant that recognition, but all three refused. As a result, in the late 1920s, the Stalin regime was in dire straits. Despite all courtesy, secret police control, the Russian people were growing more and more restless. It is a matter of record, admitted by Liverpool, that during 1931 and 1932, Stalin and his whole gang were always packed and ready for instant flight. Then in November 1932, the conspirators achieved their greatest feat. They landed Franklin Roosevelt
You are
at the White
dead if you continue like this.
Scrupulous, utterly without a question. That charlatan traitor turned the trick for them. Without even asking consent of Congress.
Shut up. Yeah. Too bad. Can you do it? No. Who's that? Who's shooting me? Who's shooting at me then? Fook.
The rest is too well known to need repeating. We know how Roosevelt and his traitorous State Department kept building up the communist manufacture in our own country, and thus throughout the world. We know how he perpetrated the Pearl Harbor atrocity, or his excuse for hurt us in World War II. We know all about his secret meeting with Stalin and Kelvin, and how he, with Eisenhower's help, delivered the Balkans and Berlin to Moscow. And last, but by no means least, we know that that 20th century Benedict Arnold not only practiced that horrible United Nations controlled government, but actually schemed all the arrangements planted within our country. In short, the day that Roosevelt entered the White House, CFR conspirators gained full control of our foreign relations machinery and firmly established the United Nations as the houses for the Illuminati one-world government. Now, which to stress one other very vital point. That Wilson League of Nations plot brought Schiff and his gang to the realization that control of just the Democratic Party was not enough. True, they could create a crisis during the Republican administration, as they did in 1929 with their Federal Reserve manufacturing crash and depression, which would bring another Democrat stooge back into the White House. But they realized that a 4-year disruption in their control of our foreign relations policy could play havoc with the progress of their conspiracy. It could even break up their entire family, as it almost did before Roosevelt saved it with his refuting of the Stalin regime. Thereupon, after that Wilson debacle, they began to formulate plans to achieve control of both of our national parties. But that posed a problem for them. Manpower. Stooges in the Republican Party also added manpower to the Democratic Party, because control of just the man in the White House would not be enough. They'd have to provide that man with trained stooges for his entire cabinet, men to head the State Department, the Treasury Department, the Pentagon, the CIA, the USIA, etc. In short, every member of the various cabinets would have to be a chosen tool of the CFR, such as Rusk and McNamara. Also all undersecretaries and assistant secretaries. That would give the conspirators absolute control of all our policy, both domestic and, most importantly, foreign. That course of action would require a reserve pool of trained students, instantaneously ready for administrative changes and for all other exigencies. All such students would of necessity have to be men of national reputation, high in the esteem of the people, but they would have to be men without honor, without scruple, without conscience, men who would be vulnerable to blackmail. It is needless for me to stress how well the CFR succeeded. The immortal Joe McCarthy fully revealed that there are thousands of such security risks in all federal agencies. And Scott McCloud unmasked thousands more, and you know the price the Tipton has had to pay, and is still paying, for his exposition before a Senate committee of the traitors in the State Department. And you know that the men in the State Department who delivered Cuba to Castro had not only been shielded, but promoted to the crux of the whole one-world government and the maneuvering necessary to create another League of Nations to house such a government. As I have already stated, conspirators knew that only another world war was vital for the success of their plot. It would have to be such a horrifying world war that the peoples of the world would cry out for the creation of some kind of a world organization that could assure everlasting peace. But how could such a war be brought about? All the European nations were at peace. None had any quarrels with their neighbors' nations. And certainly their troops in Moscow wouldn't dare to start a war. Even Stalin realized that it would mean the overthrow of his regime, unless so-called patriotism would weld the Russian people behind it. But the conspirators had to have a war. They had to find or create some kind of an incident to launch it. And they found it in a little inconspicuous and repulsive little man who called himself Adolf Hitler. Hitler, an impecunious Austrian housemaker, had been a corporal in the German army. He made the defeat of Germany into a personal grievance. He began to rabble-rouse about it in the Munich, Germany area. He began to spout about restoring the greatness of the German Empire and the might of the German soldier. He advocated the restoration of the old German military to be used to conquer the whole world. strangely enough, Hitler, the little clown that he was, could deliver a rabble-rousing speech, and he did have a certain kind of magnetism. But the new authorities in Germany didn't want any more wars, and they promptly threw the obnoxious Austrian housemaker into a prison cell. Aha! Here was the man who decided the conspirators who, properly directed and financed, could be the key to another world war. So while he was in prison, they had Rudolf Hess and Goering write a book which they titled Mein Kampf and attributed the authorship to Hitler, exactly as Litvinov wrote Mission to Moscow and attributed the authorship to Joseph Davies, then our ambassador to Russia, and a stooge of the CSR. In Mein Kampf, Hitler, the pseudo-author, outlined his grievance of how he would restore the German people to their former greatness. The conspirators then arranged for a wide circulation of the book among the German people in order to arouse a fanatical following.
Ah, shit.
On the
Oops.
release from prison, also arranged by the conspirators, they began to groom
Clear.
financing for travel to other parts of Germany to deliver the travel-rousing speech. Soon he gathered a growing
What a get ya.
other members of the war. That soon spread to the masses, who began to see in him as savior for their beloved Germany.
Negative contact. Moving
Then
on.
came his leadership of what he called his Brown Shirt Army and the March on Berlin. That required a great deal of finance. But the Rothschilds, the Warburgs, and others of the conspirators provided all the money he needed.
Let's head back.
Gradually, Hitler became the idol of the German people. And then they overthrew the Hindenburg government. And Hitler became the new Führer. But that still was no reason for a war. The rest of the world watched Hitler's rise, but saw no reason to interfere in what was distinctly a domestic condition within Germany. Certainly none of the other nations felt it was a reason for another war against Germany, and the German people were not yet incited into enough of a frenzy to commit any acts against any neighboring nation, not even against France, that would lead to a war. The conspirators realized they would have to create such a frenzy that would cause the German people to throw caution to the wind and at the same time horrify the whole world. And incidentally, Mein Kampf was actually a follow-up to Karl Marx's book, A World Without Jews. The conspirators suddenly remembered how the Schiff Rothschild gang had engineered the pogroms in Russia, which slaughtered many, many thousands of Jews and created a worldwide hatred for Russia. And they decided to use that same unconscionable trick to inflame the new Hitler-led German people into a murderous hatred of the Jews. Now it is true that the German people never had any particular affection for the Jews, but neither did they have an ingrained hatred for them. Such a hatred would have to be manufactured, so Hitler was used to create it. This idea more than appealed to Hitler. He saw in it the grisly gimmick to make him the godman of the German people. Thus, craftily inspired and coached by his financial advisors, the Warburgs, Rothschilds, and all the Illuminati masterminds, he blamed the Jews for the hated Versailles Treaty and for the financial ruination that followed the war. The rest is history. We know all about the Hitler concentration camp and the incineration of hundreds of thousands of Jews. Not the 6 million, nor even the 600,000 claimed by the conspirators, but it was enough. And here let me reiterate how little the internationalist bankers, the Rothschilds, Schiffs, Lehman, Warburg, Baruch, care about their racial brethren who were the victims of their nefarious schemes. In their eyes, the slaughter of the several 100,000 innocent Jews by Hitler didn't bother them at all. They considered it a necessary sacrifice to further their Illuminati one world plot, just as the slaughter of the many millions in the wars that followed was a similar necessary sacrifice. And here's another grisly detail about those concentration camps. Many of the Hitler soldier executioners in those camps had previously been sent to Russia to acquire their arts of torture and brutalization so as to emphasize the horrors of the atrocity. All this created a new worldwide hatred for the German people.
Regroup.
But it still did not provide a cause for war. Thereupon Hitler was incited to demand the Sudetenland. You remember how Chamberlain and the then diplomats of Czechoslovakia and France surrendered to that demand. That led to further imperial demands for territory in Poland and in the French Tsar territory.
Oh, Philip, very gutted.
Then came his fascist Stalin. Hitler had been screaming hatred against communism. Oh, how he ran against communism. But actually, Nazism was nothing but socialism. And communism is, in fact, socialism. But Hitler disregarded it. He entered into a pact with Stalin to attack and divide Poland between them. While Stalin marched into one part of Poland, for which he was never blamed, the Illuminati mastermind saw for that. Hitler launched a blitzkrieg on Poland from his side. The conspirators finally had their What a horrible war. And in 1945, the conspirators finally achieved the United Nations. They knew how to implement one-world government. And truly amazing, all of the American people hailed this foul outfit as a holy republic. Even after all the true facts about how the UN was created were revealed, the American people continued to worship that evil outfit. Even after Adolf Hitler massacred the Soviet spy and traitor, the American people continued to believe in the UN. Even after I had publicly revealed the secret agreement between Kcin and Molotov, that a Russian would always be the head of the military secretariat, and by that token, the real master of the UN, most of the American people continued to believe that the UN could do no wrong. Even after Kcin, the first Secretary General of the UN, confirmed that this Molotov secret agreement in his book.
There's no sign of them. Send a description with the report.
Even after the truth about the Korean War was revealed, how the Russian General Vassiliev, head of that UN military secretariat, was given a leave of absence by the UN so that he could take command of the North Koreans and Red Chinese who were fighting the so-called UN police action under our own General McCarthy, who by orders of the UN was fired by the pusillanimous coup in order to prevent his winning the war. Our people still believed in the UN, despite our 150,000 sons who were murdered and maimed in that war. The people continued to regard the UN as a sure means for peace, even after it was revealed in 1951 that the UN, using our own American soldiers under UN command and the UN flag, in collusion with our traitorous State Department and the Pentagon, had been invading many small cities in California and Texas in order to protect their plans for the complete takeover of our country. Most of our people brushed it off and continued their belief that the UN is a holy of holies. Do you know that the UN Charter was written by traitor Alger Hiss, Molotov, and Dushinsky? That Hiss and Molotov had made that secret agreement that the military chief of the UN was always to be a Russian appointed by Moscow? Do you know that at their secret meetings at Yalta, Roosevelt and Stalin, at the behest of the Illuminati operating in the CFR, decided that the UN must be placed on American soil? Do you know that most of the UN Charter was copied intact, word for word, from the Marxist so-called Constitution?
Go, search!
Do you know that the only two senators who voted against the UN so-called treaty were the only two senators who had read it? Do you know that since the UN was founded, communist enslavement was grown from 250 million to 1 billion. Do you know that since the UN was founded to ensure peace, there have been at least 20 major wars incited by the UN, just as they are now inciting the war against Middle East? Do you know that under the UN setup, the American taxpayers have been forced to make up the UN Treasury deficit of many millions of dollars because of Russia's refusal to pay her share? Do you know that the UN has never passed a resolution condemning Russia or her so-called satellites, but always condemns our allies? Do you know that J. Edgar Hoover said, the overwhelming majority of the communist delegations to the UN rested without aid? Now, 66 senators voted for a consular treaty to open our entire country to Russian spies and satellites. Do you know that the UN helps Russia's conquest of the
Auto
world
drive now
by
enabled.
preventing the free world from taking any action whatsoever, except to debate each new aggression to the UN General Assembly? Do you know that at the time of the Korean War, there were 60 nations in the UN, yet 95% of the UN forces were our American sons, and practically 100% of the force was paid by the United States taxes? And surely
Still nothing new with that.
during the Korean War, prevent us
All the wars, everything's paid by taxpayers, no matter what country you're in. They have wars for us to pay it. It's all a scam. People are dumb, really
Auto
dumb.
drive now disabled.
Objective is one world government, which means one world law, one world court, one world army, one world navy, one world air force, one world school, and a one world church in which Christianity will be prohibited. Do you know that a UN law has been passed to disarm all American citizens and to transfer all our armed forces to the UN? Such a law was secretly signed by Saint Jack Kennedy in 1961. Do you realize how that fits in with Article 47, Paragraph 3 of the UN Charter, which states, I quote, the Military Staff Committee of the UN shall be responsible through the Security Council for the strategic direction of all armed forces placed at the disposal of the Security Council. And when and if all our armed forces are transferred to the UN, your sons will be forced to serve and die in the UN command all over the world.
So there you go, that's they want war. To kill us all.
Do you know that Congressman James B. Utton has submitted a bill to get the U.S. out of the UN and a resolution to prevent our president forcing us to support the UN embargoes on Rhodesia. Well, he has.
You fascists!
Many people all over the country are
Get
writing
out
to
of our
their
city!
representatives to support the up bill and resolution. And did you know that to offset the up bill and resolution, 50 congressmen, spearheaded by Schweiker and Moorhead of Pennsylvania, have introduced a bill to immediately transfer all our armed forces to the UN. Can you imagine such brazen treason? Is your congressman one of those 50 traitors? Find out and take immediate action against them and help congressman up.
Criminals!
Do you know that the National Council of Churches passed a resolution in San Francisco which states that the United States will soon have to subordinate its will to that of the UN, and that all American citizens must be prepared to accept it? Is your church a member of the National Council of Churches? In connection with that, bear in mind that God is never mentioned in the UN Charter, and their meetings are never opened with prayer. The creators of the UN stipulated in advance that there should be no mention of God or Jesus Christ in the UN Charter or in its UN headquarters. Does your pastor subscribe to that? Find out. Further, do you know that the great majority of the so-called nations of the UN are anti-Christianity? That the UN is a completely godless organization by orders of its creator, the CFR Illuminati. Now, have you heard enough of the truth about the Illuminati's United Nations? Do you want to lead your sons and our precious country to the unholy mercy of the Illuminati's United Nations? If you don't, write, telegraph, or phone your representatives and senators that they must support Congressman Buck's bill to get the UN out of the UN and the UN out of the US. Do it today, now, before you forget. It is the only salvation for your sons and for our country. Now I have one more vital message to deliver. As I told you, one of the four specific assignments Rothschild gave Jacob Schiff was to create a movement to destroy religion in the United States, with Christianity to be the chief target. For a very obvious reason. The Anti-Defamation League wouldn't dare to attempt it, because such an attempt would create the most terrible bloodbath in the history of the world, not only for the ADL and the conspirators, but for millions of innocent Jews. Schiff turned that job over to Rothschild for another specific reason. The destruction of Christianity will be accomplished only by those who are entrusted to preserve it, by the pastors, the men of the
Get
cloth.
me some extra hands here.
As a start,
Well, that's the end of that harassment campaign. Our prospect will be grateful for the assistance.
by the name of Dr. Harry F. Ward.
Send me support
Reverend
units.
Ward.
Now that you've helped them, they might be willing to talk to us.
Theological Seminary. Rockefeller was
There's
one of the very willing people to Thereupon, 1907, he financed him to set up the Methodist Foundation of Social
Where did
Service.
you run off to?
Ward's job was to teach the right young men to become so-called ministers of Christ and to place them as pastors of churches. While teaching them to become ministers, the Reverend Ward also taught how to very subtle and practically preach to the congregation the entire story of Christ the Lord. To cast doubt on the divinity of Christ, to cast doubt on the authority. In short, to cast doubts on Christianity as a whole. It was not to be a direct
I saw something here.
much of it by crafty insinuation. It was to be applied as a picture to be used in Sunday school. Remember Lenin's statement? Give me just one generation of youth,
winning, mate.
and I'll transform the whole world. Then, in 1908, Methodist Foundation of Social Service, incidentally America's first communist front organization, changed its name to Federal Council of Churches. In 1950,
Come on,
several
I'm reloading you,
churches
bloody
became
monkeys!
very secular. So in 1950, they changed the name.
All units, proceed to alarm
So I
location.
have to tell you more about how this national doctrine churches is deliberately destroying faith in Christianity? I don't think so. But this I will say. If you are a member of any congregation whose pastor and church are members of this Jewish organization, you, your contribution,
The suspect!
are helping the Illuminati to destroy religion and your God and Jesus Christ. Thus you are delivering your children to be indoctrinated with disbelief in God and church, and which can easily transform them into atheists. Find out immediately if your church is a member of the National Council of Churches.
Getting bitten by a mosquito, I think. Oh, they're a nuisance.
Withdraw from it at once. However, let me remind you, that same destroy religion process has been infiltrated into religion. If you have seen a Negro march downtown and other such demonstrations, you have seen how the Negro mob are led and encouraged by ministers and even Catholic priests and nuns who march along with them. As a matter of fact,
Search the area.
the Mormon Church is about the only one I know of that is clean of that kind of Judas infiltration. But of course, there are many individual churches and pastors who are honest and sincere. Find one such for yourself and for your children. Incidentally, this same Reverend Harriet Ford was also one of the founders of the American Civil Liberties Movement, a notorious pro-communist organization. He was the actual head of it from 1920 to 1940. He also was a co-founder of the American League Against War and Fascism, which, under Broward, became the Communist Party of the United States. In short, Ward's entire background reeked of communism, and he was identified as a member of the Communist Party. He died a vicious traitor to both his church and country. And this was the man, old John D. Rockefeller, picked and financed to destroy America's Christian religion, in accordance with the order given to Kcin by the Rockefellers. In conclusion, I have this to say. You probably are familiar with the story of how one Dr. Frankenstein created a monster to do his will of destroying his chosen victim, but how instead, in the end, that monster turned on his own creator, Frankenstein, and destroyed him. Well, the Illuminati, CFR, created a monster called the United Nations, who, supported by their minority groups, rioting Negroes, the traitorous mass communications media, the traitors in Washington, was created to destroy the American people. Well, we know all about that many-headed hybrid monster. We know the names of those who created that monster. We know all their names. And I predict that one fine day, the American people will come fully awake and cause that very monster to destroy its creator. True, the majority of our people are still being brainwashed, deceived, and deluded by our traitorous press, TV, and radio, and by our traitors in Washington. But surely, by now, enough is known about the UN to stamp that outfit as a deadly, poisonous rattlesnake in our midst. My only wonder is what it will take to awaken and arouse our people to the full truth. Perhaps this record will do it. 100,000 or 1,000,000 copies of this record can do it. I pray to God it will. And I pray to Him to inspire you, all of you, to spread this story via this record to all loyal American people. You can do it by playing it to study groups assembled in your home, at meetings of the American Legion, the VFW, the DAR, all other civic groups and women's clubs, especially the women's clubs who have their sons' lives at stake. With this record, I have provided you with the weapon that will destroy the monster. For the love of God, of our country, and of your children, use it. Get a copy of it into every American home.
Going to be calling it a day shortly. I think this is the longest video I've ever done, actually. Such a good game, this. Oh, I see these ones in it. What are they offering me a new car? That opens them, so I need to. That's right. That's right. That's not right. Give me a sec. Oh, it's going to take some while decoding this tomorrow. I'm going to call it a day after this. Does it matter which way it goes? That's right. It's good done now. I'm sure it's connected up right. I've not got a new one upstairs, have I? Nope. It's just this one. There's nothing there. Right. Is it this one?
drive yourself?
Oh, strange. Oh, here we go. That took some doing. We got to drive a car in. Right. What are you supposed to do next? That's just going up, isn't it? Right, I want to go down, I won't go fucking up. Right. I've done that, now what? So that was me bashing a mosquito, the nuisance. I don't know what you're supposed to do here. I don't really know. Oh. Now what? I don't know, guys. I don't know what we're supposed to do here.
Hi, Pumpkin, it's me. First off, I'm sorry. I lost my head. I didn't stop, just pint. It's no one's fault, but that computer putting us cabbies on the fucking dole. On my way now. I don't know how far I'll get, but oh, so help me, I'll get in range of that fucking box of bloody circus. I'm gonna give it a thrashing. I'm gonna. 10:33 nice conditions.
Well, I just went round in a fucking circle, haven't I? Like a dickish stuff headies. I think I've had enough. I'm going to call it a day. This is where I'm going to leave it, guys, because I've done quite a bit of time on it. As you can see, I'm closing it. Right, guys, take care. See you soon.